everybody, and welcome. I'm so excited to be joined this morning by Jess Co. She is a self-taught artist that you can find at the Living Heart Co. She's a music director for a parish and a mother of two, and she tends to be a woman that has many hats at any given time, I've come to find. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I want to kick off Stories of Hope on my YouTube channel and talk a little bit with some women that have struggled with infertility and have been blessed to have a baby in their arms at the end of their struggle. So welcome, Jess, and I'm so excited to dive in and hear more about your story. So as we get started, I just would love to hear a little bit more about you, Jess, and your family.
Okay, so I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Born and raised here, spent 14 years studying music in college in Chicago. And then toward the end of those, in those studies, I married my husband, Michael. He's also from Grand Rapids. And we were married for about 5 years when we started to try to have a family. I come from a large family, so I'm one of 7 kids and, grew up Catholic, sort of in the culture of like large families represent saying yes to God kind of thing. That rhetoric that is true, but not a comprehensive reflection of what it means to say yes to God, as I learned in my own life. And always wanted a family. I studied opera, so in my early 20s, I got married at 24, but I was still very immature and still very focused on like, I want to be a singer. We even talked about moving to New York for a time because I have an aunt who sings on Broadway and she was going to like connect me with people. And so I was very much like in a self-centered mindset, for my early 20s. And we weren't really trying to avoid, like, we always like used NFP. But I wasn't really like in the mindset of let's have a baby now.
Mm-hmm.
So that all changed about 5 years into our marriage. We had both finished master's degrees, and we were living in Chicago. And I remember visiting just a general OB-GYN and saying, like, I've been taking these medications, but we're starting to think about wanting to have a baby. So I just wanted to like ask you, should we wait like until these medicines are out of my system? And she was very cold and flippant and just like, there's nothing you can do to make a perfect baby, which is not at all what I was asking. But she's like, nature wants you to reproduce. So tell me when you get pregnant was kind of her message.
Wow.
So after that, we were unsuccessful for a long time. And about a year into it, I was 29. So getting to that age where you start to worry. And I remember going to, of course, like fertility issues weren't on my mind just because, I am one of 7 kids, but I'm the second oldest. So no one else, none of my siblings had any kids or had any experience with anything. Like I was the first one and first one to try, first one to figure these kinds of things out. And my cousins were all having babies, like no one else in my family had any fertility issues. So I just assumed, I think you always just kind of take it for granted that if you're called to marriage, that includes a calling to motherhood.
Yeah.
At least I took that for granted. But that was a very like juvenile mindset, I think, very spiritually immature way of thinking for me, at least. So about a year into it, I went to see a fertility specialist in Chicago, not knowing anything about NAPRO yet. I'd heard like some things in my community of Catholic friends, like back home in Michigan, about NAPRO doctors, but I just was going with like what was in network for my insurance. And I went to a fertility specialist who did an ultrasound, and she was also very cold and callous and said, well, you have a large endometrioma on your ovary, which means you probably have stage 3 or 4 endometriosis. So the only way you're going to be able to conceive is IVF. And I said, well, that's not an option for me. And she kind of like rolled her eyes like, oh, because of the religious thing. And I was like, yeah, because of the religious thing. And I don't know, I'm just a person who, like, doesn't take no for an answer, I guess. Like, I never quit. I never quit anything in my life. And I've always approached everything in my life with an attitude of, like, if you want it, then you can work for it. Like, if there's a will, there's a way. So I've always treated my, like, work like that, and I've always been able to, like, be resourceful and find ways to make my work fruitful.
Mm.
So when it came to that, I was like, "Oh, we're not gonna take no for an answer."
Yeah.
So immediately following that, I started to look into NAPRO. Found there was a NAPRO doctor in the area, Dr. Stalling in Peoria, Illinois, and it changed my. It was an HMO insurance, so I changed her to my doctor of choice so that the next month I could go see her, and I did. And the other thing that the regular gynecologist did a blood draw on cycle day 21, which is just like the standard, and told me that my hormones were fine.
Mm.
Um, After being told that I probably had endometriosis, I was a little bit skeptical. I'd always had like normal cycles, a lot of pain, like excruciating, debilitating pain.
Mm.
And looking back now, like other obvious symptoms that now that I know more, I wish that when I had visited the gynecologist and had said I'd like to try to start a family, that she would have asked me like some basic questions like, what are your cycles like? Are they normal? Do you have pain? Do you have large clots? Like, you
Right.
know, to just like assess the overall health.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would be so easy. Like, I wish that that were part of your yearly physical,
Yeah.
instead of just like screening for cancer, but like
Yeah.
having a fertility, like reproductive health assessment, like does like they do for other things, like heart disease, because endometriosis is so common. And I know now from following doctors who are researchers that in the ACOG who trains OB-GYNs only gives them like 30 minutes of pelvic pain training in their whole studies. And so they're essentially taught to prescribe birth control, and if that doesn't work, hysterectomy.
Mhm.
So they,
It's
for
heartbreaking.
it is, and for something that is so common
Yeah.
and is becoming more common because it's a disease that thrives on estrogen and um, and all of these environmental things that
Mm.
mimic estrogen in the body, I feel like it's going to be more and more common.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that I know more about it now, and that's like one good thing that came out of my long fertility journey, which is actually 6 years long. Um, so I looked into NAPRO, found Dr. Stalling. She had me start charting, so I started charting, and she looked at my chart on the first appointment and said, "Yeah, very highly suspicious that you do have endometriosis, so we
Mm.
should schedule you for laparoscopy." She also did a comprehensive hormone panel, which showed an abysmal level of hormones. And based on my chart, like it was obvious that my cycle was different than what they assume as a normal
Mm.
OB-GYN. So if if they had taken my blood 3 days later, they would have found that I had no progesterone and no estrogen in my
Mm.
peak phase. So I was very lucky to find NAPRO when I did because, first of all, it wasn't, there were only, I think, 9 NAPRO trained surgeons in the country at the time. This was
Wow.
2013. And one of them just happened to be close enough that I could easily um, be treated by her. So I scheduled the surgery, and going into it, I had done like a lot of Google research in endo, and I was convinced. I immediately like started following an anti-inflammatory diet, like no wheat, no dairy, no processed foods, like no refined sugars, only whole organic soy in moderation, things like that. Like for me, it's like all or nothing, which I think is really hard for my husband, but it works for me.
Yeah.
So going into the surgery, I still was a little bit delusional, like thinking they'd go in and find just like a cyst or something. Because I guess I just couldn't process that I would have a disease for so long and not know. I knew other girls that had endo. So I went into that surgery thinking it would be a quick laparoscopy, outpatient. And then when I woke up, I was informed that they had converted it to laparotomy, which is a 6-inch incision because it was so extensive and so destructive that all of my organs were fused together. And Dr. Stalling, we just needed to get a better look, and she needed to like remove the scar tissue and tried to separate everything, and that took 9 hours. So that was, I would say that was like the earthing moment. Initially, I thought I would never sing again because those are the muscles we use to sing, and they were just traumatized. I had been intubated, so my vocal folds were so swollen. I don't think I could sing really for about 3 or 4 months. And
Wow.
so it was like everything in my life, like but I woke up from that surgery and she said, your chances of being pregnant just went from 0% to 40%. And so I had all this optimism. I thought, well, those are great odds, like from 0 to 40 in 9 hours. That's not bad, right? So I, again, kind of had this delusion that now I'll get pregnant. So, but I had kind of a come to Jesus moment where I realized that living in a stressful city with a stressful lifestyle where even just going to the grocery store is so difficult, and that stress, I had this false belief that I handled stress well, but I realized on the outside I do, but on the inside my body was killing itself
Yeah.
because endometriosis is very impacted by stress and the stress hormones and all of that inflammation. And so we made the decision to move back to Michigan. This sort of like focus on our family. And that was kind of like a big growing up moment for me because I never wanted to leave Chicago and I always wanted to just like pursue that bohemian lifestyle, and I figured I would just work the kids into that. But it really started to recenter my focus on family. And we moved back home. I ended up switching to Dr. Parker. He's about 2 hours away from where we were living, and I had another surgery the next year because still, wasn't successful. Had an ultrasound, it looked like I had a giant cyst that wasn't resolving, but it ended up being scar tissue. And Dr. Parker told me, he's like, I've never seen anyone with adhesions like these. And so surgeons are trained to prevent scar tissue from forming during the healing process of surgery, but he said my body's immune to that and that some bodies create super scarring. And that was me. So but I again woke up from that surgery thinking, oh, this surgery wasn't as invasive, so maybe the scarring won't be as bad. And I looked into all these things like serapeptase and castor oil packs, and I did pelvic floor therapy where they, loosened up the scar tissue. And I had one good too. And we did some ultrasound series then to assess ovulation, and I never ovulated once. I just kept making luteinized unruptured follicles, which is when the egg matures, but it doesn't release for some reason. The follicle doesn't rupture, but it does produce hormones, even though it turned into a cyst. So blood work would show that you're ovulating, but a more careful observation from the doctor who knows would tell you, no, you didn't actually ovulate, you have a cyst. So that's like over and over every month. I kept making those on my right side. My left side wasn't doing anything because that's the side that was just destroyed from the scar tissue. So after about a year, I was open to adoption, but my husband wasn't ready. And we were both grieving really hard, which is something that I think a lot of people don't understand about infertility, especially in the church. I think it's especially lonely and isolating to be infertile in the Catholic faith because, again, we're known for our large families, and there is so much rhetoric about like saying yes to God in correlation with large families. And, I would go to Mass on Mother's Day or Father's Day and hear that talk every week, and I'd look at my empty pew and I think that this is my yes to God, because you know my yes to the cross of infertility was like a no to IVF. Like a lot of people were pushing us to do IVF, but I knew that if it were God's will, that I wouldn't need it, first of all, and that I would never. Um, I guess I'm a rule follower, but my perception has changed a little now through the journey, because the 6 years I feel like were really transformative spiritually too. Um, Before I felt entitled to the children, like there's these people, they do IVF, you give them babies, why don't you give me a baby? I'm following your rules, that kind of thing. And toward the end, the grief just wears you down, it breaks you, and you end up with nothing. But that's when that's when God entered into my heart, I guess, because I really surrendered everything to Him toward the end and
Mm.
found peace, but also um, then having been blessed with a child, I had already surrendered the idea that I was entitled to children or that they were somehow mine. Like when you give everything over to God, it really teaches you that these children are mine, actually God's. And I'm just their stewards. And I don't think I would have ever like found that truth without having been broken down to the bare bones and forced like out of desperation for survival, I guess, to just surrender everything to God. But infertility is very isolating, and I think what people don't understand is that they think that we're grieving a lifestyle or a dream, but what we're grieving are actual people. And like, right. So I learned that when I held my daughter in my arms for the first time. I saw her face and I was like, "You're the one that I've been grieving for 6 years. I didn't know you yet." But people who are struggling with infertility are grieving their sons and daughters who should exist, who would exist if Adam and Eve hadn't fallen, if our bodies weren't broken, if our world weren't broken. And like I learned that longed for children deserve to be grieved. They're worthy of our grief, and so many people along the way would just like I would try to say like, oh, it'll happen, or maybe just adopt, and the dismissal of grief makes you feel more isolated. Especially now that our culture has become so um, like opposed, I guess, to the family unit and like having kids and like that as a model of idealism. Um, so many women are like childless by choice. So you never really know who you're going to get when you open up to someone. Um, it could be the neighbor who's like, "Why don't you have kids yet? Don't you want kids?" Or it could be the elderly woman at church thinking that you're using contraceptives because you don't have children yet and you've been married for 10 years.
Mm.
Um, and so I found a wonderful community on Instagram. It's such a great place to connect with others, and so I just love what you're doing here because it's so important. Even the priests that I even the priests that I tried to have like spiritual direction with weren't very helpful.
Mm.
They don't know what to say. Like about 4 years in, I went to a priest and shared my story and just shared how angry I was and how frustrated. And he told me I sounded like a spoiled child. um, and then told me about his cousin who adopted or something like that. And I said I was open to adoption, but everyone has to grieve in their own way. And in my opinion, it's okay if someone never gets to the point in their grief that they feel like they want to adopt or they feel called to adopt. I learned through our adoption education about the importance of biology. It's important for adoptees, right? Like they emphasize how important it is for them to be in touch with their biology. And through that, there was a light bulb moment. I was like, okay, it's important for them. That's why infertility hurts so much. And that's why, adoption can't fix the grief of infertility. It certainly lessens it, and it certainly heals part of that wound in your heart, but it's okay to grieve your biology as well. You know, you hear so many people say, like, oh, you're selfish. You just want your own children. Like, why don't you adopt? There's so many children who need adoption. And yes, that's true. And if you feel like you are in an emotional place, in a mental place where you've dealt with that grief, like if infertility is what is motivating you to adopt, you know, you have to deal with that first. But I realize like that it's important for everyone, for all humans. Like the biology there confers just an inherent sense of belonging between you and your offspring, and there's that is also something that's worthy of being grieved. And so I think like my overall message is like whatever you're grieving, if it's your biology, if it's your dream, if it's the people that should exist, like that is valid, and it's okay to feel that grief. Like I think I tried to stifle it for so long that it just festered until it was just all consuming. And then finally I just like realized like my grief needs the space to be like fleshed out. And so I grieved it all. Kind of worked through that a little faster than my husband, but he, you know, we have different personality types. He's completely type A. So all he ever wanted in life was to be a father. That's all he ever wanted. Whereas I had like these other dreams and things to distract me and stuff. It was really hard on him. So after about a year of like ovulating, no success, I campaigned for a third surgery just to see like, is the scar tissue back? And so I had a third surgery in December of 2016.
Wow.
Dr. Parker said the scarring is all back just as bad as before. Despite everything, he's like, and I pushed him. He's not one to like say, here's your chances, because as he would say, it's either 0 or 100%. It just depends on the person. Um, but I pushed him. I'm like, we need like a um, definitive prognosis in order to either like release us from this journey of trying and move into adoption, or like give us hope to keep trying. And he said, I just don't think it's going to be possible. So we went home. That was mid-December, and that New Year's Eve, my husband and I like made a pact that if we didn't have children that year, I was open to adoption, but he was still struggling, that we would sell everything and move to New Orleans. And so I had been kind of like gently pushing him toward adoption, but I didn't want to push him. You know, I really just backed off and I prayed, God, you know, if this is the direction you want us to lead, you want to lead us in, then it's got to come from him. He's got to feel comfortable with it. You have to move his heart. I'm not going to push him anymore. And, you know, about 2 months later, sorry, I think this was 2015. Anyway, about 2 months later, he came to me and said, you know, I think I'm ready to try adoption. And so I took that as a sign from God that like, okay, this is what you want us to do. And so of course I dived fully into that because that's just how I am. So, but he had some reservations, you know, some stipulations saying like, um, it's it's gotta feel right. You know, we didn't like the whole like put our picture in a book and have someone flip through a book and like go with this big agency and pay 40 grand and things like that. So we were just kind of leaving it in God's hands. I created like a profile book that I dropped off at pregnancy resource centers, and my neighbor was a nurse who worked with sometimes young teen moms and things like that. So just kind of like spreading the word through family and friends, and then I made a Facebook page with like our profile and saying like we would like to adopt. Throughout this time, like still kind of like processing through, but it was actually like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I mean, it had been 5 years of struggling and trying, and I finally got to the point where I was like, you know what, if you're not going to be a mom, God, if that's your will, then just take the desire from my heart. And I know whatever you have planned is going to be just as good. And I had this peace for that whole year. So we got contacted by a couple people for adoption, and some of them seemed like promising leads, and some of them seemed like scams. So it's a thing you kind of got to watch out for if you're not working with an agency. But ultimately, on April 25th of that year, which is the anniversary of the day I met my husband, his sister called me and said, I have a lead on an adoption, and I think it's a really good one. And I had this feeling in my heart. It was like, this is it. Like, I don't know, something inside me told me. And so, we got kind of excited. We didn't, so she knows their family, but because of the situation, and I won't go into details because they're personal details, but because of the situation, like we didn't have any contact with her. So we were just kind of like hoping and praying she would want to meet us. And that summer, we decided to do our home study just in case. I actually had started painting to save up money for our adoption, and so that's how I got into art. Because I'm a trained musician, so I started painting. I was painting like watercolor houses for people, and opened an Etsy shop, and started just like saving money away. And then at the end of that summer, on August 28th, we got the call from someone that was working with her that she wanted to meet us. So we scheduled a meeting for September 8th. September 1st, I found out I was pregnant. And that was a Friday before Labor Day. So, of course, I was like, obviously, I never truly lost hope because otherwise I wouldn't have taken a pregnancy test, right? You kind of like just get into the mode of like testing every month. And I saw like the faintest line, and I think I had a panic attack. I called my husband at work, went to get my blood drawn. The HCG was really low, so the doctor thought it was a miscarriage, but had it drawn 2 days later, and it was doubling. So this was before we met her, and so we were thrust into this situation. Now we're like, do we still meet her? Like, are we having a baby? Are we adopting? Like, what's going on? Are we having two babies? Like, we don't know. So it was scary because I was bleeding the whole time, but my HCG was still doubling every 48 hours. So we didn't know what was going on. We were in this brutal limbo. I had just started 2 new teaching jobs at 2 different colleges that week. It was like life just like threw up in my face. So we met her that Friday, which was actually September 8th, Our Lady's birthday. And we fell in love with her as a person. And we were just so hopeful. But the next day, I started miscarrying. And I knew it was a miscarriage. And that was probably like the lowest of my life. Like, I remember these just like animal like cries coming out of me when I found out baby was gone. Like, I couldn't understand. Like, God, why would you like punk me like this? Like, we were happy, we were at peace, we were, meeting this wonderful woman who might choose to adopt her child. Like, I didn't need this. But I realized later the why. So 2 days after I miscarried, we got the call that she chose us. And 4 weeks later, our son was born. We were at his birth, and we were out of state for 3 weeks for the paperwork to clear. And when we brought him home, the next day I found out I was pregnant again. And I just every appointment at that one, like infertility is so traumatic because of the grief that can't resolve. Because there's always this sliver of hope. And hope is a really tricky thing. Like, there were times when I had a really complicated relationship with hope. I was like, why should I hope? Like, I'm not guaranteed a child. So what am I hoping for? And I realized that like when I found my peace, that my hope was in the wrong place, that my hope should have been in God and in God's goodness, and then like trusting that whatever the outcome, it would be good ultimately. But I was just hoping for a child. And so I would, see stories of people who had conceived and think, okay, well, that's fine for them, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen for me. So that doesn't really give me hope. And people would say, like, oh, don't lose hope, don't lose hope. But I would say, like, why not? Like, letting go of hope is actually part of my healing process.
Mm.
Letting go of that specific hope, I guess, and really just shifting my heart into the hope that everything will be okay. Like, God is good. Whatever He wants, it's whether it's we live in New Orleans and have this like vacation life for the rest of our life, whether we because I had really wanted to like go abroad and like serve on missions, like whether we do that, like whatever it is, it'll be good. And it turns out for me, He was planning this awesome miracle all along, and I'm grateful for that. And I do pray that it gives someone hope, that maybe He's working on a miracle for them too. My kids are 9 months apart, so that was really wild. It's still wild. They're 5 and 4 now. But every appointment was so stressful, like from the first blood draw. Um, I would cry at every single appointment. And I had a lot of anxiety during my pregnancy. Just, we had been so accustomed to loss. And I getting back to like the reason for that miscarriage, I truly believe now is so that God could give me insight into the grief that my son's birth mother felt in relinquishing him to us. Because, I mentioned earlier, like in my early 20s, I was very self centered. Well, infertility can become a really self focused thing too, because you're so focused on like your diet and your cycle, and you're just, you feel like you want to do everything you have control over, and so you get really focused too on like, this is about me. Like for me, I felt like it was about me because it was my body that couldn't um, house a child. It was my body that couldn't support that life. um, and even in the adoption process, like you get really focused on like your hopes, your dreams, and your vision of like where you want things to go, and you can easily lose sight of the fact that somebody else's life is being torn apart at the same time. Like adoption is a really tricky dynamic of joy and grief and gift and loss. And so, because I was the one that was kind of, again, driving everything, like making profiles and reaching out to the people and everything, I feel like God really needed me to understand, or just to know the deep pain that she was feeling too. And because you feel super happy, you have this beautiful child who's like the most amazing boy, and it's almost like why we meditate on the passion of Christ. Why we meditate on it, because nothing reminds you more of what that authentic love is than seeing how Christ like bled for you. And in our own sufferings, it helps us to recognize when other people are suffering. And so I love to say to her, like, we have matching scars because and the scars like kind of represent what brought us together through our son. My infertility, my scars from my infertility. Her scar was from giving birth to him. My infertility brought me to him, and um, her gift brought us all together. We have a really beautiful, open relationship with her, and see her like for holidays and birthdays, and have frequent visits and things like that. So it's a really lovely relationship. But it's amazing to be able to have that perspective and that insight and foresight looking back. Just knowing, like, at the moment, I was like, I don't know how you could do this to me, God. But now, like, I realize I needed that because I needed to suffer in the same way that she suffered, so I never forget or never take for granted what she did for us.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Jess, that's so beautiful. So I want to hear then, with your pregnancy with your daughter at the same time as having brought your son home. So that just share that pregnancy a little bit with us, if you wouldn't mind.
It was, as I said, very stressful for me, just emotionally and mentally because of I think, PTSD from infertility and the loss of that miracle pregnancy. I had a lot of pain, which was scary because I didn't know if it was normal. And looking back, I think a lot of it was just scar tissue stretching and breaking. I cannot believe, first of all, she made it. Because she had I knew from the very beginning she was gonna be a force to be reckoned with, like, she had to get through all that scar tissue, and, um, also, like, I had completely abandoned my diet because, like, when Dr. Parker said it wasn't possible, I was like, "Well, then I'm eating cheese," you know? So I wasn't, like, watching my diet, I was drinking all this caffeine because we had this newborn that we were feeding every 2 to 4 hours, and, she defied all of those things, and she is amazing, and she was active in the womb. Um, I during and I think God's presence and providence was there the whole time. She went full term, so I was 36 when I went to deliver her, so considered advanced maternal age, and, they gave me the option of being induced or waiting it out, and I was like, "You know what? Get her out." Like, I couldn't take it anymore emotionally, like, I was so stressed out. I know people who have had, stillbirth, things like that, like, my mother had too. So I was just like, "Just get her out." Like, I was just convinced the whole time, like, this wasn't real. She wasn't an actual baby I was going to hold in my arms. So I went to be induced, and they were worried that I wasn't going to be able to push past the scarring in my cervix. And they were worried that I was going to need a C-section. But I just happened to have a nurse at a Methodist hospital who was Catholic, who had a St. John clip on her name tag, and who was praying for me. And they ended up just laboring me down more, and I ended up having a normal vaginal birth, pushing and everything. And she was born on July 18th. Um, and yeah, I don't want to say that I feel like I lost anything because I certainly didn't. But those first few months that she was a newborn, my son was 9 months old. So, those are like big milestones for babies too. And it was just hard to keep up with everything, hard to keep up with his milestones, hard to keep up with her. I actually had a really severe bout of postpartum anxiety, OCD too. And so I started counseling for that. That was super helpful. Um, and luckily that, resolved in due time. I ended up being able to breastfeed them both, which was really cool. My son, he was really interested in it. Again, he was 9 months old. He had always been bottle fed, but we'd actually had family donate breast milk. So he was bottle fed exclusively on breast milk for the first 6 months of his life, which was really amazing. And he was really interested. So I tried to latch him, but he bit me the first time. And I was like, okay, no, we're not doing this. But eventually he just like kept asking, and I just like felt like I couldn't tell him no because he didn't feel like I could give her that, not him. And so eventually, like, we tried, and he latched on, and he ended up like nursing until he was about 2. She
That's
nursed him until he was
amazing.
about 2 also. And then I always kind of like hoped for another baby. After I weaned my daughter, I did find out I was pregnant again in October of 2020. But unfortunately, that was ectopic, and that ruptured in November. So I had to have my only healthy tube removed. So now, and that's the other like kind of beautifully tragic paradox of my story that it took a lot of processing too. 2020 was COVID, so there was just so much more grief again there because all of my concerts were canceled. Like I had concerts as soloist scheduled with these orchestras. It was going to be like my debut with the Grand Rapids Symphony, and that concert was canceled the day before it was supposed to happen because of all the lockdowns. And now I realize I was grieving the loss of music in my life. Just even being able to teach, to sing, to commune in church with others and sing praises to God, like those are all also something else I took for granted. Um, I think like that, and then like the grief of the topic and losing my fertility again. So I went from like being at peace with my infertility to being surprised that I wasn't infertile to thinking I'm not infertile. I could have another child to then all of a sudden being like, okay, I'm infertile again.
Mm.
There was a lot to process, and we also moved from Kalamazoo to Grand Rapids. Actually, we're supposed to close on our house the day that my tube ruptured and I had that emergency surgery. So
Wow.
um, that week, like we were moving, and my children's lives were being turned upside down. I just didn't have a lot of time to process that. So after we moved, like my emotions and my mood and everything were just all over the place. I eventually and I think, I think it's important for people to also know that it's okay to struggle even after you have a miracle.
Mm.
I have two miracles, and um, you are inclined to think like you don't have the right to grieve this loss because you already have two miracles. But that only hinders your healing process. And so for me, like people around me, oh, at least you have the two kids, at least you have those, and even that my own surgeon told me it was just a clump of cells when I asked her if it had a heartbeat. So a lot of people just like trying to diminish what it is that you're grieving. Ignore them. Find the people who get it. Find me online. You can talk to me anytime. I get it. I get the grief. I get it all. And really, like people say, like, no one is meant to carry their cross alone. Not even Jesus carried his cross alone. And find the people who will carry that cross with you. Like that, those were the most helpful people. Like I had one aunt who also adopted, not out of infertility struggles, but just like understands like the process. Who would never say like, "Oh, you should adopt." Like she would never say that. What she said was, she actually started crying and just said like, "I'm so sorry. Like this is really hard. We are grieving with you." And to have somebody say that, just to know that you're not carrying the cross alone, really does lighten the weight of the cross.
Mm.
Um, just to have it validated, it seems like such a simple thing. It's not. It's actually very profound because culture just has a very complicated relationship with grief and how to handle people who are grieving.
Oh, Jess, that's so profound and so powerful. And I am just in awe of your journey and what the Lord has worked through you, through your suffering. And I think my one last question, you have answered every question that I had for you. But I just have one more question. And it really takes us back to your art. Like, how did the Lord use that time of grief and heartache to really allow for you to be fertile in ways you couldn't have imagined?
Absolutely. Well, I feel like my spiritual life was extremely fertile, especially when I stopped begging for a child and started surrendering.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's part of the reason that it was so long, 6 years. Like my son is 5 right now, and I think his whole life, like that doesn't even match the time that we were begging and pleading and longing for a child yet. Um, I think, I mean, I'm an especially creative person just by my personality, but I think every person is creative. I mean, we are made in the image and likeness of the supreme creator, and I think we're all called to create. And so for me, I just turned to my untapped creative skills, things I was interested in. As I said, like I guess I do pride myself on being resourceful, but I had seen other people like start Etsy shops, just get money for adoption, just like doing graphic designs from stock images and things and selling coffee mugs. And I was like, well, maybe I can do something like that. And it turned into something that I think was more of like a second calling. As I said, I started just painting watercolors, and that was, I think I started in 2015. My son was born in 2017, and for a couple more years, I kept doing that, like trying to keep it up with the kids was almost impossible. It's like, where did I put my paper? Where did I put my paintbrush? I need a cup of water. I need a cloth for my paintbrush. It was like all these supplies, just like chaotic, hectic. And so in 2019, I was just like, I love this outlet of painting, this art that I don't think I could let it go now. I was still teaching and singing a little bit, but I think I could let it go now, but I can't keep all these supplies. Maybe I should try digital. So I started like playing around on my phone and finding, I didn't hate it. I thought I would hate it because I love the tactile experience, like seeing the colors disperse through the water and things like that. The feeling of the paint and the paintbrush on the paper, stuff like that. But it was so easy to like draw every day. So that Christmas, my husband bought me an iPad and an Apple Pencil, and I had felt a pull toward creating something more meaningful than houses. And so naturally, I just like turned to the Catholic faith. I mean, we have a rich tradition of appreciation of the arts, first of all, and we have a very honored place in our faith for sacred art. And so we just decided or felt like that was what I was supposed to pursue. And it, it was fruitful. I mean, it turned into this company, I guess, or I like to think of it as a ministry. It's called the Living Heart Co. But people started, I started to post it on Instagram. So it started as just like it was Advent, and I wanted to pray with art. I wanted to create more meaningfully. And so the way I was going to do that, I was going to pray every day, make an illustration while I prayed, and share it so that others could pray with it too. And then people started asking if they could buy prints. So um, that was right before COVID hit. And as I said, all of my music disappeared. And so all I was left with was the art. And so grateful that I was pulled in that direction because I found a lot of commiseration with the saints and with the Lady of Sorrows and everything else, like during, the next year when I had my ectopic loss. And um, when you say, like, find people who understand, like, the saints understand. A lot of them suffered more than we could even comprehend. And so I do find that like every image that I create is a prayer and is made with prayer, and I have a strong connection to. So I hope that other people kind of feel that through the art. It's an interesting thing to touch on now that artificial intelligence is making art. I keep having these conversations that like part of the reason that art is meaningful to humans is that because a human made it and poured some of themselves into it, and we can recognize what that piece of humanity is in the art. I mean, I hope and pray that that's what people encounter when they see my art is they see something really human that they can relate to that maybe um, makes them connect to that the saint in a new way.
Yeah.
Obviously, our church is not wanton for beautiful sacred art, so I don't like presume to think that I'm adding anything that isn't already there. But I do think that something new can connect with people in a different way than something that they've seen 100 times. And so I think there's a really useful and holy place for new art and new music in our faith. And I just hope that it touches people.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And they are just lovely. If you all have not seen Jess's artwork, head on over to Instagram, The Living Heart Co. They are absolutely beautiful. And they for sure are that, it kind of makes me think of like, why is The Chosen so popular right now, right? It's because these stories that we all know, but seeing it come to life, seeing it in a different light, it just speaks to our hearts. That truth isn't less true because someone else has done it once and we could have just looked that up. We could look up Michelangelo online, but we can also relate to something so different in different seasons of our life and for different people. So I love that you're doing that, Jess. It's so beautiful and such a gift to give to others through your artwork. I just love that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Oh my gosh, this is just so incredible hearing your story. And I just know that it's going to speak to so many hearts, so many people going through so many difficult moments of their infertility journey, but also for those that have never experienced that pain and really knowing better how to accompany those in their life that are struggling with this really heavy cross of infertility. And I thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story with us.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. I hope you enjoyed this interview. For more success stories, please like and subscribe my YouTube channel as I'll be posting them sporadically, and that's the best way to get updates on when I have them posted. If you're curious on what it may look like to reduce inflammation and improve your overall health through diet and lifestyle changes, sign up for a discovery call with me. It's free, and we'll spend some time talking about what's been going on with you and your health and how we can help you support your body to be as healthy as you can be.